I'm going to do some film analysis of Inception just so everybody knows it's totally a spoiler thing. It's for people that have seen the movie. It's not a review to tell you if you should spend money on a movie. And I'm attaching it to StephBot because of all the movie reviews that come up, they're all reviews like, I'm not going to tell you, oh, I love it, I felt, and they tell you how they felt watching it and stuff like this and characterize it without, and just, if they're correct, they give you a bias. But I guess I don't know. I never look at reviews to decide to watch a movie. That's for the artists, marketers, which may or may not be in tune with the movie, so it's hard to tell, and for word of mouth. But anyway, so at least Stepbot, has this idea of he's analyzing the movie and he's looking for the same kinds of qualities or topics that I would look for. And even though we disagree, once we find the intellectual content, we disagree on which was the correct statements. But for one thing, I will mention on Steph review, which I didn't watch entirely actually. I walked away and came back. I was doing some other things, so I just heard bits of it. But one thing I somewhat agree on and disagree on is, now I'm assuming you've seen the movie, is the use of the action gunplay. I think one thing that Nolan has is a use of action. I think that it takes something like that to make it familiar enough, really, sadly enough. And it's not all bad if it's done well, and it definitely is done well. And it is kind of like arbitrary. Why would you be shooting guns? But then I was thinking, well, because our dreams often are ordinary. And in these dreams, they create dreams where, they created all the architecture pretty much, right? So, except for in the very lowest levels, which had also been created by them. So they were creating ordinary worlds to fool the person into thinking they were awake. So this wasn't into someone's personal dreamscape. This was into constructed dreamscapes that were meant to be used as illusions. Now, in his case, it was his dreamscape, and they had created this big world that had then started to crumble. Also, the use of the traditional, and I agree, I don't really usually value that kind of action per se, unless it's done really well. But the beauty here was because of the time factor, where the deeper you went in the dreams, the slower relative time went. So you might have 50 years. He had that 50 years, when it was just a few minutes dreaming because it was layers deep. Um, that allowed for an action sequence that was spread out over, the second half of the movie. And when people are saying it's complex, I mean, I think he simplified it. I could have seen it even more complex. I would like a movie like that. But that's okay. I do see the inherent complexity of the dream and the dream and the dream and keeping track of all three of those. But you don't really have to, because the people go to sleep and kind of just the deepest dream at the moment is the main one. However, if you do visualize all those, then the action sequence makes a lot more sense. Like at first, I was wondering why the van would be driving along and then would skid around the corner in slow motion. It was because that was the speed it was moving. They would always go into the dream, and that would be how they would signal that the dream was going to be influenced, like the gravity or whatnot. Because every level of dream does take information, a limited amount, from the environment. And I thought it was really, really interesting to have lived that life for a whole 50 years. I thought the city that he and his wife had made was the ugliest city I've ever seen in my life. And I would definitely not have something like that. I would probably have a giant treehouse. I would have been okay with that being a little more wonderful. But I think the point of doing it so-called mundane was that this was about the dreamlike nature of our waking reality as well. So that might just be a device to explore that. I did think it was a really good movie. I thought Memento. It's definitely a movie of his. People, he's shown he's a good director, adapting somebody else's story. I think he did a good job at that because he didn't put the kind of thing you saw in Memento or in this movie into that too thickly. He respected, I guess, the vision, the group vision of the people creating it, and or just had a vision that naturally took that into account. Now, in this movie, you see again what you see in Memento. which is a really strange idea done in a way that's, you know, palatable. I mean, Memento is hard to follow in one respect. Like, wait, what's going on? You know, I had to watch it a couple times to really figure out how the plot works, you know, if I was to make a graph. But the first time through, I knew what had happened. You know that he has this weird thing. He's chasing these people. He's getting manipulated. He ends up manipulating himself. I said this full of spoilers, any movie I mention. And, and he ends up manipulating himself into killing a guy um, that has been screwing with him. So, you know, without the power of memory. And it's this very intellectual thing the guy does. And it's just full of action as well. And, you know, and weird things like he just shows up driving a muddy Porsche. He doesn't know why, you know. We don't know why until later. With all these weird signs that I think become mundane. And he was doing that too. This could have been the kind of dream and dream where it seemed indeterminate. And I'm glad that, no, he went this route. Dreams are already, you know, strange and indeterminate. And you didn't need much of that, you know. The paradoxes you can play with architecture are enough. It was better to show that, you know, uh, it was similar because in that sense we're in this dream right now, even though it's from our regular senses. And also it doesn't ever imply that this waking life is also a dream directly, or it's like two levels or three levels of indirection, if it even implies that. I don't think it says or implies that at all, but it's sort of naturally there as a possibility in these kinds of subject matter. And my impression with the movie is that no, the waking world was the waking world. You know, he said it was very different. You know, and even though there's all these levels, you know, you start to have a different kind of set of powers in the dream worlds that you don't have in the waking
My
world.
friend
So
Mel made this.